Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, and locked? Here we go. Your dial is set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us today. We broadcast 2 hours from high atop the Missouri Ozark Mountains, Monday through Friday, 9 through 11 a.m. Central Time. If you'd like to call us, we'll pay for the call, 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. Telephone listen line, if you'd like to listen to us on your telephone, 605-477-3249, 605-477-3249. Captain John Ragan is with us. Welcome, Captain John Ragan.
Good morning, Vincent.
Hey, John, you sound really clear and close. Good morning. So, John, I have a question I'd like to ask the class. I know you know the answer, so please don't answer. I'll give out the answer, I don't know, in the next few days or so. The question is, who is John Galt? His last name is spelled G-A-L-T. Who is John Galt? And there's a reason why I'm asking the class this question. If you don't know, see if you can figure it out, and we'll talk about it in a few days. Who is John Galt? Captain John Ragan, I received your email. I'm delighted to be broadcasting with you. Thank you for being with us today. And some of what you have to say is quite shocking.
We'll see if you like it by the end of the show.
Yeah, as I've said many times when sitting side by side with Captain John Ragan, or when I introduce Captain John Ragan, he will wipe that smile right off your face with truth and the numbers to back it up. Well, why don't we start, Captain John Ragan?
Well, when I was on last week, we talked a little bit about what happens when the government can only afford to pay interest. And what I did this week, and it's actually at the bottom of today's post, it's a downloadable spreadsheet called Debt Interest. It's an Excel file. And I went to the Treasury website, pulled a couple of reports, and I include those links in the spreadsheet. And I went back to the 2000 accounting year, all the way through the 2018 accounting year, showing what the total debt was, along with the amount of interest paid for that year. Did a couple of calculations, and this is a tool you can use to decide, what's going to happen when. Basically, as we look back through things, we see that the debt has been doubling every 8 to 10 years. I believe this article talked about, based on that, is we'd have a $40 trillion debt in 2025. That's not very far from here. We're talking about 6 years. And even if it goes the 10 years to doubling, you're talking about 2027. Again, not too terribly far away. If we look at what we paid in interest last year, $523 billion. That's the most that we've ever shelled out for interest payments. It's still at a very low rate. you see if you download the spreadsheet, you'll see the ratio for 2018 is 2.43%. That doesn't tell you the actual interest rate. It's just a guideline for us to have an easy discussion. The interest calculation, believe me, is much, much more difficult based on when debt occurred and what it was financed at. And for the most part, that's not important to the discussion. As we look at history, though, when we started in 2000, which was right before the dot-com crash, that ratio was almost 6.4%. It was still over 6% the next year, then it dropped to 5% and then into 4s all the way through 2008, where it was 4.5%. And of course, we know what happened in 2008. Things go to pieces, and it quickly dropped into the 3s and down to the 2s, which we're still at. So even though the debt has gone from $9 trillion in 2007 to $21.5 trillion at the end of the 2018 accounting year, our interest payment has only gone up less than $100 billion from that point. You can only imagine what's going to happen as the interest rates climb and that debt has to be turned over, because we're not paying off the debt. We've only financed it, typically for a short amount of time. So what I've done is on the right side of the spreadsheet, I've listed the debt level, 22 trillion all the way up to 40 trillion by trillion dollars, so you can decide what level you want to be when. And then I've got two columns after that. One, if we're going at the 2000% rate or the 2008%. And here we're over 22 trillion already. And if we were at the same interest rates that we were paying in 2000, we'd be paying $1.4 trillion this year, and we're only bringing in about 1.7 in personal income taxes. And by the time you add the corporate taxes, that's still roughly 2 trillion. So if we were at those rates, we're almost there. If it's even at the 2008 rates, it'd be pushing $1 trillion. And even what we paid last year, that $523 billion, you compare that to the taxes brought in, that's about 25% of all the income is going right to paying interest. Now, as that ratchets up, that means since the government's not going to cut spending, that means we're going to go into more and more debt just to pay the increased interest rates. And at some point we reach that, whether it's 2025 or 2027, we reach that point where 100% or more of taxes received has to go to paying the debt. Because if you don't pay the debt, you default, and then all kinds of bad things happen. But we're not going to get that far, because we're going to not be able to afford other parts of the government well before then. And we're already experiencing, minor ramifications from this partial government shutdown. Now, just imagine when they have to start shutting down things like the Department of Defense because we can't afford to pay them. That's what we're looking at over the next few years. Now, this sheet does not cover Social Security and Medicare, and we've also talked about that topic many times. And in fact, I've got another link where we talk about that coming up. But this gives you the government numbers, it gives you projections, and like I say, if you don't think this is real, it's going to get real very soon. Vincent?
John, as you were saying this, I was thinking about something that you and I learned earlier in our education. It's called the Rule of 72. Class, the Rule of 72 is a quick formula that can be used to estimate the number of years that's required to double invested money at a given annual rate of return. It can also be used to figure out how long it will take to double that investment. So, if you're talking about doubling, we'll call it doubling the debt, you can use the rule of 72, class. And this is a quick and dirty, and it's fairly accurate. It's going to give you pretty good results. So if you're talking about the debt doubling every 7 years, that means that annually the debt will increase by 10%. Because you can say 72 divided by 7 years is roughly 10% per year. Now, what does that mean? Let's just talk about this in terms of what would happen to you. Let's say you had a mortgage note, and every month your mortgage note was $1,000. And I picked that number because it's easy to understand on the radio, the theater of the mind. So you have a mortgage note that you pay every month of $1,000, and you expect that to go unchanged for 30 years. But let's say that mortgage note had a provision that would allow it to increase by 10%, meaning every year, which would double the amount in 7 years. So here's what we're talking about with the debt. So the first year you'd be paying the first month you would be paying, first year you'd be paying $1,000 every month. Next year it'd be $1,100 every month. Next year, $1,210 every month. The fourth year you'd be paying $1,331 every month, and the fifth year you'd be paying $1,464 every month. That's how staggering this is. So I just stopped after 5 years just to let you see how big these numbers are. And do you think that if you were making, let's say, $1,000 a month, which is pretty good, if you're I don't know, in the middle of your career, and would you expect to make $1,464 a month after 5 years? Would you expect that? Of course not. That's how big these numbers are. John, I'd love to hear your comments when we come back. Captain John Ragan's with us, U.S. Air Force Reserves, retired. Captain John Ragan's with us, thefinancialstateoftheunion.com. Captain John, Rule of 72, remember that in school?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Any comments about how staggering you can see these numbers grow if you use the Rule 72?
It's really amazing. The doubling every 8 years means that debt is growing 9% a year, which, it doesn't matter who's running Congress. It seems like that's the prevailing attitude. Spend money until we're broke. Well, technically, we're already broke.
John, have you, I know you've, received attaboys, when you had a job over the years, and the boss has said that, John, what you've been so good. Here's a raise. Have you ever gotten a consistent 10% raise year after year after year after year, like we're talking about?
Not even close.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In fact, typically you're lucky to get 2 or 3% a year.
I remember when I started out, my first job with a Fortune 100 company, I think I was at 11,600. Then I went within, I think about 6 months, they found out that I shouldn't be a financial analyst. I should be a computer systems analyst. And I think I went to 13,400. And then a state government hired me away at 19,000. And that was the end. That was the end of the big percentage increases. That was it. And other than that, that was in the, started in 78, I think. Yeah, 1978. I was making 11,600. But, those were the days, Captain John Ragan, where you could join a company, settle within the company, grow as the company grew, work hard and, rise in the company. Now it's really tough for young people to be able to do that because companies aren't loyal to anyone anymore. They aren't loyal to their customers. They don't honor their warranties. They don't care about their products. The distance between the little guy, actually doing the work, and the CEO who's jet setting around the world, the delta is staggering.
And when you understand the role of inflation in this, meaning the dollar is getting worth less, and this really goes back to 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window. That's when things really started changing. Before I even made it to the workforce, it got to the point where we reached the maximum earnings for a person. And it's like you say, you can get a better job, but once you've hit the max in whatever field you're going to be in, you may get cost of living increases. But the problem is when you look at it in total, what's coming in payrolls, it has been flat when you adjust it for inflation. So even though you've got larger and larger numbers going into your bank account, it doesn't buy any more than it did back in the 70s. Unfortunately, the way psychology works, we feel like we should, be entitled to more. So we go out and buy more, which is part of the whole debt picture. The $72 trillion of debt that we have in this country, both public and private. It's beyond imagination, and it's like I've been saying, we got a day of reckoning, and I don't know when, if we'll see the signs, and we are now starting to see the signs. It doesn't all happen at once, but boy, those wheels are wobbling right now.
When I was studying for my master's degree in finance, one of the things I remember one of my instructors saying, which I thought was very, very valuable, was that if you want to maximize your compensation, you have to change jobs 3 times. If you change your jobs fewer than 3 times, you will not maximize your salary. If you change your jobs more than 3 times, you will not maximize your salary, because then you'll be considered transient. We can't hold on to this guy because he just keeps changing jobs. So I was taught that that's what you had to do. And I tried it out. I got my master's degree, and I instantly went from 13.4 to 19,000. Captain John Ragan, I'm at thefinancialstateoftheunion.com. I've clicked on the news tab. I'm following along in class as others are. Where are we going next?
Well, we started at the bottom of the list with the file. We're going to go back to the top of the list. 48% of workers earn less than $30,000 a year. And nice thing about this article, it's got a link to the Social Security website where they calculate what the annual average wage index is. And they split this up by increments so you can see exactly how many people earned in what range, giving the totals and the average amounts for each of those ranges. And what is talked about here are the numbers from 2017. The 2018 numbers won't be available till after October, but it's a good point to start with, especially given you may have caught the news recently where the New York mayor said there's plenty of money in the world, it's just in the wrong hands. Well, Mr. Mayor, you're either ignorant or you're a liar. There's not many other choices here. Either he doesn't know, which he should be listening to this show, he'd find out, or he knows and he's just playing politics to to help bring down America. When let's do the quick discussion. We've talked about the unfunded liabilities of Social Security and Medicare and how using reasonable estimates, that number is over $200 trillion, which is what we would have to invest today. And I've talked about how that's impossible since there's not even that much money in the world, and you'd have to invest that earning 4% interest. But even if you wanted to just keep the situation from getting worse, that means you'd need about an additional $9 trillion taxed away from the American public to invest at that 4% just to keep it from getting worse. Problem is, when you look at 2017 here, all the wages for everybody adds up to just under $8 trillion. So even if you taxed 100% of all of this and used it to try to keep Social Security and Medicare from getting worse, you could not accomplish that goal. Well, you've probably also heard the young socialist from New York wanting to have a 70% marginal tax rate. Well, let's just say it was 100% of all income above a certain amount. Let's just say if you made $1 million or more a year, we're going to take everything from you. Well, for this 2017, collection, that would amount to about $372 billion. And of course, after you've taken away everything, people tend not to want to work real hard to earn very much if it's all going to be stolen from them. And just for fun, I went up another level. The level above that are people making $500,000 up to $999,999.99. And when you include everybody from $500,000 up, that total income was $644 billion. So let's put that in context. If you confiscated every bit of income from everyone making $500,000 or more, that would not have even covered half of the debt increase for 2018's accounting year. So does that still sound like there's plenty of money in the world, Vincent?
Very good point. And you're talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a 29-year-old foul-mouthed profanity using a selected representative of the U.S. Congress. I called her office several days ago, and I wanted to let her know if she's going to use that loud mouth of hers, there's actually something productive she could do, and that she could support the case for dumping all the smart meters in the United States. Of course, I have not gotten a call back from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She is an intergalactic disgrace. Absolutely horrible. Now, I don't like Congress critters to begin with, but there's absolutely no reason to use profanity the way this. I don't even know the word. But she is cheap. She's common. She's a disgrace. And how can anybody look up to her for anything? That's beyond me. And that's the gal you're talking about, right?
That's the the 70% rate.
That's what I mean.
More than enough money in the world is the New York mayor.
Right. No, I meant the 70% marginal tax rate gal. Yeah, I read that as well. Yeah. Okay. What else do you want to share with us, John? We can't pay our bills.
I found it interesting. There's Amazon publishes a report bragging about how they're helping small and medium businesses. And I looked at that because, you know, in today's economy, we're getting to be like where we were in the Great Depression, where people are having to do all kinds of, you know, things to make money to try to make ends meet. You know, back then it was, you know, selling apples or pencils or something on the street corner. Well, today, you do dog walking or deliveries or, open a store on Amazon. And I found the numbers here quite telling. And I actually went to the Amazon site to pick up a tad more information. They don't go into great detail. Basically, there's a little over 1 million small and medium businesses in the United States that sell through Amazon. And that's kind of the premier place to be because that's where so much traffic goes. Well, we look at what they're saying is nearly 200,000, so less than 20% of these businesses made $100,000 in sales. That is not profit. That is sales. You're lucky, and I mean really, really lucky, if you've managed to select the right products that has a very high profit margin on it. You're really, really lucky to make 30%. And it's probably not even going to be that much, but let's just use the 30%. So if you make $100,000 in sales, that means you'd get $30,000 to take home to pay your taxes and everything else with. And if you remember what we just talked about from Social Security, basically half the workforce makes $30,000 or less. So we're right in line with that. And that means that 80% of people selling on Amazon make less than $30,000 and probably in many cases far less. 50,000 small and medium businesses exceeded 500,000 in sales. So that 500,000 level, that would be $150,000 a year, which would be pretty nice if you're a single person. But if you're getting to be a larger business, you're probably having multiple people involved in that, or you're outsourcing other functions that would have been done by employees. So it's not nearly as lucrative as it sounds. So I found that very interesting. So we thought about, turning to Amazon to get a business going without having to start our own website and worry about payments and everything else. And this just points out, maybe you can make some money, but it's not easy to do. And even when you get there, there's, not tons of money. If you're expecting to become a millionaire, that's probably not the place to be. Vincent?
Well, I'm thinking about this business model where you've got $100,000 in sales. I don't understand how you could net 30%. I don't understand that. It seems like a huge percentage to net as far as I'm concerned. I think if you could manage to net 10%, that'd be pretty nice. But that's only 10 grand. That means $100,000 in annual sales after all your expenses, after Amazon takes their piece, after your insurance, after your expenses, getting the material, whatever you have to do in order to run this business. If you netted 10%, that would be pretty good. But you can't live on $10,000, not even in Missouri. It's impossible.
Well, another way of thinking of this, if you were looking at the normal profit and loss statement, you're probably going to see somewhere between a 3 and 5% profit margin at the bottom. At least in good times, that's what it was. And that number included payroll in the middle of things there. If you're running the business here, then that payroll is, what's left over after you get from Amazon. So that would be in that 30%. Again, if you're lucky. So, it's not easy to find products that you could get 30% after paying for the product, paying the Amazon fees and the shipping and all of that stuff. Not easy to do. You can target and get some, but you might not be able to get a high volume at that rate.
Mm-hmm. So you're in agreement with my line of thinking that 10% would be pretty good.
It's somewhere between 10 and 30, depending on what products you're able to choose.
Yeah. We'll be right back. Captain John Ragan's with us. The Financial State of the Union.com. Captain John Ragan's with us. Captain John Ragan, have you seen the documentary called The Devil We Know? It's a documentary. It's available on Netflix right now. It's about some West Virginia residents discovering that DuPont had been pumping Teflon chemicals into the air in the public water supply, poisoning more than 70,000 people. And it's not just West Virginia, it's Delaware, and it's actually every living person in the planet has this chemical C8 in his or her blood. Everyone on the planet. DuPont and 3M, which is Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing, has poisoned the entire planet with chemicals used to produce Teflon. Did you see this story?
I was not aware of that, but I've been looking at so many things that have come to my attention, and taking a Christian worldview of things. I'm seeing, if this isn't part of the satanic plan, it should have been type thing. And some of this goes back. I found a video that talked about a machine invented in 1751 in France, and that was a big turning point. It's the metal lathe, the machine that lets you make machines. And prior to that point, before that new industrialization, they're really, you talk about low wages. You're talking about $300 or $400 a year in the old style. With this machine that lets you make machines, that's when the change in productivity happened, which allowed for a new class of people, which helps explain part of what Marx was talking about. To try and understand it during that time frame, that's where things accelerated, and problems we're still living with today. But that by itself wasn't enough. You had to add the energy to it, which came in the form of petroleum and electricity. And then you follow the electricity path, where you had to have that before you could get the transistor. And from there, we are now dealing with all this artificial intelligence and robotics. It's really fascinating to look at. And at the same time, I'm looking at what's happening with Christianity, because I've been following Bill Federer's daily posts for well over a year now, and learning about how America was at the beginning. And in the middle, something changed. And I finally, when I was researching the Great Depression, I saw this thing, the Lost Generation. And these were people born between 1883 and 1900. And that was lost in the religious term, as in lost. They lost their way. And this is where, you got the Roaring '20s and the decadence that happened after World War I. And now we've got the church today that is built on this foundation that, is so far removed from the lifestyle and the ways of Christianity before all that happened. It's a fascinating study all in itself.
Yeah, Bill Federer is an American author. He's a speaker. He's a USA Preparedness instructor. John Ragan, did you get a chance to chat with him for a while at some of our expos?
I did not. I wish I had that opportunity again. There's so many things going on at the expo. You had to pick and choose, and boy, I wish I could have picked that one.
Yeah, he's absolutely brilliant, and I've been thinking about him. Class, you want to check him out? Bill Federer, The American Minute, and I'm going to give him a call and see if we can get him to spend a little time with us on the air and share some of his historical perspectives with us. Quite brilliant, to say the absolute least. John Ragan, I've noticed that I don't see many young people holding books in their hands. I don't think they read very much anymore. Let's just talk a little bit about that when we come back on the other side of the top of the hour news and commercial breaks. Do you see people reading, young people reading, or not? Everyone all set? Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Captain John Ragan's with us, the financial state of the union.com. Captain John Ragan, I was just thinking that I've been in waiting rooms pretty often, either taking someone to an appointment and sitting in a waiting room. And what I notice is nobody is reading. Nobody is reading a magazine, and nobody's reading a book. Now, Mrs. Finelli will carry a thick book with her, and when she has some time, she reads it. I don't see young people reading. I really don't. Is that just Missouri? We're racing to the bottom here in Missouri? Or are you seeing it too in your travels? Do you see anybody other than maybe Mrs. Reagan or you reading when you have some idle time?
Don't really notice that. I don't look over at people's screens. It is possible that they are reading ebooks, but I suspect, especially with the younger people, that's not the case. Video games are big, and I expect as more and more augmented and virtual reality kicks in, that they'll be trapped more and more in that setting. There's a little bit of social media, and I know younger people are going away from Facebook. That's now getting to be for older people. And the other thing that makes me wonder if these people that have kids with including teenagers with computers and cell phones, do they have any idea of the material that is out there on the internet? I mean, it's not like back in our day where there were magazines on the rack where the big one was Playboy, where you found out that women had breasts and stuff like that. But those were mild compared to what's out there now. You're talking about full videos of all kinds of things that you wouldn't even let me describe on air. And all you got to do is click and say that you're over 18, and you don't even need money for a lot of these things. I would not let a young person have unsupervised access to the internet today.
Okay, I told our children, I said when they were growing up, you can use the internet and you can go anywhere you want. But if you go to the wrong place once, just once, that's it. And I have a router here at our house, and it has Wi-Fi capability. I can type in 192.168.1.1, enter a administrative type login, and I can enter a password, and I can turn it on. I can adjust the signal strength up or down in 10% increments. So I can say, let's power this router Wi-Fi with 10% signal, 20%, 80%, 90%, crank it all the way up to 100%, or I can turn it off. It's turned off. And here's why. Let's say someone were to come and visit our house. and they see that we have Wi-Fi. Well, hey, great, you got Wi-Fi, I could use that. I have no idea where they're going to go with that Wi-Fi signal. I have no idea what sites they're going to visit. However, that visiting on their device, like their cell phone, for example, on our Wi-Fi signal, which we pay for, is attributed to me. And I absolutely, positively refuse to let people use the signal that is attributed to me any way they darn well feel like it. If they want to go and surf and visit sites that I don't think are appropriate, that's up to them, but not on my signal, not in my house, and not with something that's attributed to me. You're known by the company you keep. I don't even want them searching for things. You know, they could, let me give you an example. Back when I was a computer consultant, somebody wrote on one of the restroom walls in a public school where I was a consultant, a bomb threat that would go off on Hitler's birthday. Okay? The school administration, the principal, the superintendent, and those running the school took it very seriously. And they asked me and a guy that was working with me to figure out who might have searched for bomb making, bomb threats, words using or phrases using the word bomb in them, how to construct bombs. And we printed off an enormous amount of results. We printed out, and we used, it's like 500 pages with multiple results per page, like 20 results per page, of which computers with which logins searched for which phrases relating to bombs. And one of the results that I couldn't believe was in a very unusual time. And these were all time stamped. You know, normally the children are in school from, let's say, around 8 o'clock to around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, this was like at night, way past any time that students would typically be there, way past it, in a location that was one where the students would never be. And what was the phrase? I'm going to tell you. Black, beautiful, busty bombshells. Black, beautiful, busty bombshells. And we weren't looking for who is searching for pornography. We were looking for, is someone trying to make a bomb to hurt people and destroy property within the school? But what we found out was one of the employees was doing this on school computers when he shouldn't be. A person who was entrusted by the school and the parents and the school board to supervise and help and educate the young children. Can you imagine that? True story. John, any thoughts? I mean, we're seeing that kind of thing. We're seeing people who are engaging in behavior that is beyond the pale with children, high school and below. Teachers having sex with students. Of course, they make the news when they're found out, and many times, and they should be. That's the kind of stuff that's going on. So, class, if you're thinking about, hey, sure, I've got Wi-Fi. It doesn't cost me anything extra to let anybody in my anybody who visits the house, sure, have at it. Go ahead. Any comments on that, Captain John Ragan? What I said about my concerns?
Yeah, it's crazy out there. In fact, I used to clip articles when news came out. It's typically a female teacher with a male student, and sometimes these teachers were even married and had kids. And I stopped clipping them because it was happening too often. It just wasn't something out of the ordinary to talk about anymore.
There's a school about 20 miles from our house in our county, small high school. And there's allegedly a woman teacher married who did exactly that. Big family name. She's been shunned by the community, married, and allegedly was having an affair with a student. What was she thinking? What was she thinking? Her life is, pretty much upside down now. But I don't think anybody put a gun to her head and said, you're going to have to do this. I was teaching a very large class in Virginia. And it was really large. My classroom was the size of a gymnasium. And I looked across the classroom and I saw a teacher in my classroom, sitting off, in the back, near the back with one of my students. And I just walked up to him and I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, she's got some problems and, I'm just kind of helping her." I said, "Oh, get out." I threw him out. He was a teacher from another building, on the same campus. He just decided he was going to come into my classroom unannounced, uninvited, unwelcomed, and he was going to talk to the student. He was about 40. She was a high school student. They ended up getting married. I did what I could do to stop it. Were they having an affair? I don't know. Was it inappropriate in my classroom? Absolutely. Did I stop it? Absolutely. Never happened again in my classroom. Any comments, John, before Mark in Illinois joins us?
Nope.
Mark in Illinois, I've got you on, and you'll be joining us right after these few short commercial announcements. Class, when you see something, if you think it's wrong, take action. Don't get yourself hurt, but speak up. Class, I have two thoughts for you. One thought is, should we decide to move from Missouri, where do you think is a good place for us to land, the Finelli family? We've gotten a suggestion already off air. That's Kansas. And thank you, Robert, for that. Are there any other suggestions where it would be a good place to land for the Finelli family should we decide to move, which could happen? Next question is, who is John Galt? And we can talk about that in a few days. And Mark in Illinois, welcome. You're on with Captain John Ragan.
Yeah, good morning. I think the reality about all of this stuff, as far as I was suspecting something last week of a conjunction happening on the 22nd, and we may not think that anything really happened, but it's kind of funny how all the GPS systems with the Air Force and the air traffic controllers and the Coast Guard are all going haywire at the same time. What do you think about that?
And how about the movement and the renumbering of the airstrips? What about that?
Yeah, because, if they can't, a pilot, the only thing a pilot really has to do is land the plane. That's about what he has to do. I mean, everything else is, pilot control, and the AI. But it looks to me, when you look at this book, I just wanted to ask Captain John Ragan about Joshua's Law and Day. If he read this book, it's a little book called Joshua's Law and Day by C.A.L. Tootin, and he was a professor at Yale, and he taught. Let's see, he taught the. I'd like to find it here. Hold on here. He taught professor of military science and tactics, and this was back in the 1800s when this book was this book was actually published. I think it was like 1890s or something like that. And so I was wanting to ask Captain John Ragan what he thought about Joshua's Law and Day, if he's had a chance to read that book, because what's interesting there, it says it talks about Beth Haran, and the word Beth Haran means caverns, a house of caverns. So it kind of makes me think that the only safe place is going to be in an underground military base. And when all this stuff comes down, and that doesn't mean you have any guarantees, because, you're going to have supernatural protection of God, regardless.
Well, we could have a couple of hours discussion just on this. I have not read that book. Last week, I did talk about a video playlist from the Suspicious Observers YouTube channel, and it's on Earth catastrophe. And it started off a little strange to me. It talked about a book on catastrophe that was classified by the CIA. And as this series developed, he gets into things called micronovas. I didn't know these things existed, and apparently they happen at intervals. And I believe this is, if you go by the current scientific dating methodologies, about every 12,000 years, and we're just a few decades away from that 12,000 year point. So if you've got limited time, I recommend going over there and at least watching the ones concerning micronovas, and there's another one in the series that deals with pole shift. And this gets into how the electromagnetism that we have from the sun, when this type of thing would happen, it affects the rotation of the Earth. So whether it would stop the rotation temporarily or just slow it down, now you're talking about some of the things like John Morse talked about, where the oceans now have that momentum, and you have tidal waves, and you also have high winds because at the equator it's going around 1,000 miles an hour. You slow down next to nothing. Those are pretty severe winds. Talk about it more when we get back.
Yeah, Captain John Ragan's with us. Mark, would you like to stay with us?
Sure, I will. Thank you.
Great. Okay. We'll be right back. Captain John Ragan's with us. Mark in Illinois. Captain John, you were talking about pole shift, weather, the oceans. Please continue.
And let me transition a little bit. John Little has a site, omegashock.com, and he's written a nearly 300-page book available as a PDF. You can get the link from the omegashock.com site or go to Ezekiel's Fire. There's an S after Ezekiel, .com, and like I say, it's a free PDF download. And in there, he talks about the prophecy in Ezekiel, and the only thing that he saw that could do that would be a massive solar flare. Well, I want to get in contact with John, because now that we know about these micronovas, which are something that happen to stars all over, not just ours, we think that a star is either normal, it has some of this, abnormal weather like CMEs and solar flares, or it gets to the end of its life and has this massive nova. Well, these micronovas are destructive too, just not as destructive as if it was a full nova. And a lot of the things we've seen from history, which are attributed to, ancient aliens too. Could very well be this. I believe, you look at like the stone structures that have been vitrified. That could have been very well done by a micronova. And I believe Ezekiel's fire, rather than being a solar flare, would be another micronova. And interesting thing that in the pole shift video, back to the Suspicious Observers YouTube channel, I'd heard, discussion about how, the Earth's crust is very thin and how it could slip like an orange over the core to end up in a different position. Well, things like that don't just happen unless there's an external force. And this micronova type event could be that type of external force which would allow those bonds between the mantle and the crust to loosen up to the point where the poles with the ice that's there wanting to equalize the weight, and we'd end up with a equator in a new place. And of course that would be devastating too. When any of that would happen, conjecture. Obviously those types of events, just like a grid down event, just about impossible to prepare for. And my best advice is right now is prepare the best you can for an event like the Great Depression, where you've got a place to live and able to raise, some or all of your own food. Try not to worry about some of the rest. And Vincent, you were talking about moving. If I had the ability to move right now, I would go to Belize. And that kind of be a topic for another day too, a number of reasons for that. But yeah, weather like we've never seen before, number of reasons.
Yeah. Let me just share this with the class. I was talking with Rich Shealy off air, and we were talking about, scenarios, and one was a grid down situation. What would happen? And I mentioned the water towers all over the country. Some of them are cylindrical. Some of them are like balls on top of, 4 legs. But they all do something very similar. And the water towers above a city or an area that has a fairly significant population with the municipal water systems, they all do the same thing. They have water coming from a source, whether it be a river or a well, and pump the water up the water tower. And that water then is gravity delivered through the plumbing system, through that municipality or that city. Then the question is, well, there are places that are freezing cold, like Montana, Michigan, Minnesota, in the Northeast. Why don't they freeze? The answer is because the water that goes into them is warmer than freezing, and the water that is consumed at a rate which prevents the water in the tower tank from freezing. So what does that mean? That means that the water exchange from new replacement water to water that was in the tank being drawn out is moving fast enough to prevent that water from freezing. In a grid down situation, that water won't be replaced. And that just gives you an idea of how fast that water is moving through that tank. That tells me that in one of these situations where the pumps no longer pump the water, if people realize that and they say, let's fill up the bathtub, and a whole bunch of people start doing that, that water will be gone by tonight. If they don't realize that, it might last, a day. So I just wanted to share that thought. If you think that the cities are sustainable without electricity, I believe you're mistaken. Mark, do you have any comments on that?
Well, I just, when we're looking at everything happening at once, if there is when there is a grid down situation, when the whole country is short-circuited as far as electrical grid, then all these nuclear power stations are going to go hot. They're all going to be China syndrome all at once. And then, there's going to be so much radiation. And the Bible also prophesies Ezekiel 38 about nuclear war in the North American continent with Russia and China. So you got all this stuff. You're going to have so much radiation in the air, you probably won't be able to live 24 hours outside. The only way you're going to be able to stay alive is if you're in an underground military base, because you're not going to be growing food. You're not going to be doing any of that stuff. If you're outside in any of this stuff, within 24 hours, you'd be dead. And radiation poisoning and radiation sickness is an awful way to die.
Captain John Ragan?
Yeah, and the reason I'm not concerned about that right now, and this gets into the Matthew 24 and Daniel prophecies, we still haven't had the revealing of the Antichrist, which starts the last 3.5 years. And at the end of the 7 years, that's the abomination that causes desolation. And when you read that with what we know about nukes today, to me, that would suggest that what we consider World War III starts with a nuke going off in Jerusalem. Since we haven't had the revealing, I consider we have at least 3.5 years before that would happen. And my personal belief is the temple has to be rebuilt, so I'm thinking we really have 7 years before that type of event. Not that it won't happen, not that there won't be other types of things go on, because there's terrorist events that could be done nowadays that would kill millions of people. So there's still going to be bad things happen in the world, but that nuclear war, World War III type scenario, I'm just not seeing that right around the corner yet.
Mark, I believe what you're talking about is the 104 nuclear reactors in the United States, and they rely on the grid for the cooling of those reactor vessels, whether it be a river cooling, whether it be lake cooling, whether it be ocean cooling, or those huge cooling towers. When the grid goes down, those nuclear reactors, those 104, have an alternative power generation system powered by diesel engines to keep that cooling system going. But at the most, they have 30 days worth of diesel fuel. So if you average between empty and a full tank of diesel fuel, that would give you about 15 days or 2 weeks of cooling, if they could get diesel fuel to keep the cooling system operational during the shutdown procedure. But from what I understand and what I've read, that it takes about a year to fully shut down a nuclear reactor. But we have between, let's say, we have on average about 15 days worth of fuel for the generators to do a rapid shutdown. Not a complete shutdown, but a rapid shutdown. So when you say instantly radiation, I think what you mean is around 30 days. Is that about right?
Well, I don't know about all the details. I just know that sooner or later, and probably much sooner, those nuclear reactors are going to experience a meltdown in the reactor core. And what I was asking about, I don't think it's a coincidence, because right after I talked to you about the GPS, going haywire all over the world on the 22nd, their announcement came on during the break that, 2 Air Force planes had collided, and, I wonder why they collided. So, you have to look at Joshua's long day in Joshua chapter 10, because this all has to do with comets. And these 2 comets go back to ancient times during the time of Egypt. They go back during the time of Joshua. We see them throughout the Bible showing up, and they do show up at this 25,826.54 years. There's a cycle called the precession of the equinoxes, and it all deals with the Great Pyramid of Giza, because the Great Pyramid of Giza is pi, and it's all mathematics. There's no type of hieroglyphics in the pyramid, so it really does give us a a map, a road map of the future.
Captain John Ragan, do you have a feel for what the Great Pyramids actually were built for, what the purpose was?
Well, again, boy, if we had a couple more hours, it was kind of the central point, and I think when things shifted, that was kind of in the same place, both as far as east-west and equatorially.
Captain John Ragan will return with us. Mark in Illinois, thank you so much for being with us. Class, if you'd like to brush up on the details of what we've been talking about, you can go to the Financial State of the Union, thefinancialstateoftheunion.com, and click on the News tab, and you'll see the resources that Captain John Ragan posted for today's broadcast. Class, I'd like to remind you that the video, The Devil We Know, the chemistry of a cover-up about the DuPont and 3M corporations, what they've done to poison you, Captain John, his family, our family, everybody on the planet. Please take the time to watch it. It's available on Netflix right now. The Devil We Know. And we have all been poisoned. And as I think about this, it's amazing to me that the perpetrators of these crimes are not in jail. Even more amazing to me, it's that they're still alive. The devil we know. The birth defects that DuPont and 3M has caused. The diseases, the cancers. And I often wonder why it is that some of our servicemen who have been exposed to Agent Orange haven't had their Agent Orange cause them to go ballistic and extract justice for crimes against them, us, their families. It's interesting to me that it hasn't happened. Or if it has, it's been covered up. What would you do if you had a child born with serious birth defects that were painful to that child, requiring surgery after surgery after surgery? What would you do? Would you be angry? Or would you just say, oh, well, I guess that's the way it is? Why do we allow these things to happen? Why don't we march down to our schools and demand the removal of people who we hire to educate our children, and yet they don't? Why do we allow that? I don't know. I've tried unsuccessfully, but I'll tell you what, if I had a band of 20 people that would stick with me, and I saw the things that are happening in schools with these teachers who are preying on young people, sexually and otherwise, I'd march down with those other 19. I'd pick those people right out and throw them right out of the building. That's what I would do. I'm not suggesting you do it. I'm just saying that's what I would do. But I can't get 20 people to even show up and demand a fair election at the electric cooperative. I can't even get one of my neighbors to say, hey, I'll support you. You want to lower electric bills? I think I can live with that. I can't even do that. That's why I'm talking about moving. I've had it with the GDP. I really have. And class, if you know of detractors that try to beat us up for trying to do the right thing and stand up for the little people, and you see them beating us up on the internet, why don't you go attack them the way they're attacking us? Captain John Ragan doesn't get paid for doing this. Rick Miller doesn't. Norm Shealy doesn't. I don't. We're all volunteers. Just trying to make the planet a little better. We're exposing the corruption, we're naming the names, and we're not just complaining. We're saying, here's what's happening, and here's what you do about it. Captain John, very quickly, any thoughts?
Well, it's like Billy Sunday said, 14. We need a revival because our churches have become third-rate entertainment centers. That wasn't 2014, that was 1914.
He's absolutely right. Absolutely right. Our churches have failed us. Our corporations have lied to us. They've poisoned us. They've riddled us with diseases. And yet we kind of just shrug our shoulders and say, oh, well. So who is John Galt? Who is John Galt? That's your homework. Who's John Galt? Captain John Ragan, thank you so much for being with us. Class above all, honesty and integrity. What happens next is up to you.